Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Declan Daly, and I am the Chief Operating and Financial Officer at USCIB. On behalf of USCIB, I'd like to welcome you to today's training webinar focused on the very exciting transition to the new digital ATA Carnet or eATA. As many of you know, USCIB has served as National Guaranteeing and Issuing Association for ATA Carnets in the United States since 1969. And we are committed to helping Carnet holders navigate the significant modernization of the global Carnet system. Today's session marks an important milestone. For more than 60 years, the ATA Carnet has been the gold standard for temporary importation. Now the international community is moving towards a fully digital environment that promises greater efficiency, better visibility, reduced administrative burdens, and a more streamlined experience for both customs and holders. Over the next hour, our team will walk you through the benefits of the new eATA, explain the global transition plan, demonstrate both the mobile app and the desktop platform, discuss the different hybrid use cases, and review the resources and support available during this transition. We'll also reserve time at the end for Q&A. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to help you prepare for the next generation of ATA Carnets. Now let's get into today's program. Let me just quickly go through the agenda. We'll spend a brief moment talking about USCIB, and then we'll really get into it. We'll give an intro to eATA Carnets. We'll talk about the eATA Carnet process and really dive into it. The transition plan, the global transition plan, you'll hear more about that as we migrate or transition the 81 countries into the new digital Carnet. We'll get to see a video which explains everything in a lot of detail. And then we'll talk about how to look at Carnet history and how to close a Carnet. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the different uses, hybrid uses of paper and digital Carnets, and that again will be when you were traveling with a Carnet and going to a country that's digital and one that's still paper. And then we'll talk about the different training and support resources that are available to everyone. We'll leave time at the end for an FAQ section. We'll go over some questions that we've already been asked and we've provided answers. And then we'll obviously take any more additional questions from participants. Quickly about USCIB, we are an international business association that was founded in 1945. We were moved out of Washington, D.C. to our headquarters in New York City, coincided with the founding of the United Nations and business capital of the world. Our mission is to be the voice of U.S. companies, large multi-U.S. national companies doing business around the world. Our members are really top 300 Fortune 500 companies, firms and associations from all different industries and all different sectors. We are the sole U.S. affiliate of three of the biggest leading organizations, international organizations in the world. And as I mentioned, we've been managing ATA Carnets since 1969. We have two authorized service providers who issue Carnets on our behalf, Boomerang and Roanoke Insurance Group, and USCIB itself also plans to return to issuing Carnets in October 2026.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Madison Calkins. I'm going to present this next portion of the presentation, and then afterwards I will hand it off to my colleagues Frankie Radish and Sydney Corlition to continue going over some of this really exciting information. And before I begin, I want to mention that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available for all participants to watch afterwards. We will have it posted on our website along with the presentation slides. So if there's any information you want to come back to, you don't need to worry about taking photos or anything. It'll all be accessible afterwards. And lastly, I think Declan mentioned this already, but if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature. It's at the top of the Teams webinar. And if the questions aren't covered in the presentation already, then we'll go over them at the end. So to start off, we're going to really quickly recap some of the basic features of an ATA Carnet that will continue to exist the same way in the digital world. So as I think everyone here probably knows, the Carnet is an international customs document that allows for the duty and tax-free temporary importation of goods into participating countries for up to 1 year. And everyone here knows that goods moved on a carnet must be re-exported back to their home country within that time frame. And the ATA Carnet is often called a passport for goods because they allow goods to be cleared through customs quickly with a single document that's stamped at a border crossing. And they can be used for an unlimited number of trips within that carnet validity period, just like your personal passport. And carnets can be used to transport goods that fall into one of these three categories we see on the screen. That's professional equipment, commercial samples, or goods for exhibitions, fairs, and cultural events. Next slide, please. So those are things that can all go on the ATA Carnet, but things that cannot go on a Carnet stay the same in the paper and digital worlds. And oh, perfect. Sorry, there's just a little lag in the slides here, but goods that cannot be moved on an ATA Carnet are items such as those in the first three bullets, food, perishable items, disposable goods, giveaways, items to be sold. These don't qualify for a Carnet since they're not meant to be re-exported as the Carnet requires. And also I'll point out on this list, if goods are prohibited for import or export according to US or foreign governments, they may not be moved on a carnet. So an ATA carnet does not absolve a holder from complying with any other customs requirements, such as for export licenses or any restrictions on certain technologies. And again, all of these policies that apply to the current paper carnet continue to apply the exact same way to the digital carnet. Next slide, please. That said, there are going to be some additional benefits to the carnet in the digital world. So we're going to highlight a couple of those on this slide. First, when it comes to tracking information, the digital ATA Carnet provides real-time visibility into the movement of goods. And this is something we're really excited about. And we'll kind of see how this works in the next section of the presentation, but there's a number of features within the mobile app and the desktop that show you things like the history of each transaction right after it happens. You can tell, the time it was processed at, which customs authorities and officers processed it, really key information like that. And second, using the carnet itself will be more straightforward. Each segment of a journey of the items being moved will have its own itinerary. All that information is going to be called a travel in this system. And this is going to make it easier for whoever the representative presenting the carnet for them to know exactly what it is that they need to present. And we know sometimes it can be a little bit difficult if someone's not as familiar with the carnet steps to know which part of the document they should be looking at. And along the same vein, the process on the customs side will also be clear. So customs authorities will have their own portal that they're going to be working in to process the digital carnets. And even if a customs officer is new to their role, it should be pretty clear to them which declaration they're supposed to process. And lastly, in a fully digital world, the risk of losing a physical carnet will be gone, which we're really also looking forward to. And there's going to be a few new ways that carnets can be shared among representatives. So this is going to make it easier to pass these digital documents back and forth. All right, so now that we've looked at a couple of the exciting features of the digital carnet, we're going to start to understand the process itself. So we can move to the next slide, please. And we're going to start off by talking kind of at a high level about this global transition plan. So, up until now, there's been over a decade of work really that's gone into the design and testing of this digital system. And then the past couple years, 2024, 2025, that was the preparation phase where the digital carnets were first put to use alongside the paper carnets, and each country in this global system has worked closely with their customs authorities to prepare those different customs authorities to accept the digital carnets. And now we're in this transition phase, which is this year and 2027. The first group of countries that included the UK, Norway, Switzerland, and all of the EU bloc all started accepting and issuing eATA Carnets to their businesses in June of this year. So we are nearly 2 months in, actually, to the start of this digital world. And that group of countries totals to 30. So 30 countries have transitioned to digital. By the end of 2027, end of next year, all other countries will be transitioned to digital carnets. So that by the time 2028 comes around, the ATA Carnet system will be completely digital. We're going to go more into depth on some timelines important to U.S. holders later in the presentation, but for now, we will say that U.S. Customs has indicated that the U.S. will be ready to go digital before the end of 2026. So the U.S. will be a digital country by the end of this year. And yes, and we're going to, as I mentioned later in the presentation, we're going to dive deeper into what exactly will happen during this transition period when some countries are digital and some are still transitioning from paper. We'll look at those scenarios and how to navigate those in a little bit. But for now, we're going to talk about the actual steps involved with this eATA workflow. So first, I'm going to walk us through this, this 8-step diagram to give a high-level image of what this looks like. And after this, we're going to watch a video. It's about a 10-minute video that shows the full process from start to end. So these two sections will give you kind of a good overview of how this works, and then the rest of the presentation will involve breaking down each step into detail so you can really get a sense of what's required for you at each part of the process. So to start off, looking at step 1 of this diagram, this is where you'll begin by applying for your ATA Carnet in the exact same way that you do now. So you will do so with one of the authorized service providers, Roanoke or Boomerang, through the Carnet application platforms that are already in use right now. So those are online platforms where you go, you present your information on your Carnet, and then step number 2 is where something new will be introduced in the system. So right now, after you apply for your Carnet, you receive the document in the mail. In the digital world, you will continue to receive a paper Carnet for the time being, but you will also be receiving what is called this PIN and an ID, or an ID and a PIN. So this is how you're going to actually receive your digital Carnet. And your service provider will share specifics on how they share that information with you, but it will likely be via email, or the PIN and ID will be posted in that application system. But those are going to be the ways that you actually access the digital Carnet. And to do that, in step 3, you'll be downloading either a mobile app or accessing the eATA Carnet system on a desktop website. So I want to make a keynote that this is now a separate system from where you actually apply to your Carnet. So the first step is applying to your Carnet through your service provider through their issuing application. And now when we get to step 3, we're accessing the eATA, the digital Carnet system. And once you have that app downloaded, or you've accessed the same system on the web, you will register and create an account profile. That's step 4. And step 5 is where you will use that PIN and ID that you received from your service provider to download that digital Carnet into the new digital system. Step 6 is where you're going to prepare your travel. This is basically preparing each leg of the journey of your items. So you're going to indicate where the items are starting from, where they're moving to. And after you create those itineraries in step 6, we'll go to step 7, where you'll be receiving, you'll be able to see the different QR codes and IDs that are going to be used to process those declarations by customs. And lastly, in step 8, this just shows how you will receive notifications and be able to see the transaction history within your mobile app and desktop view. So again, that's the really high level look at how this is going to work. And now we can watch a video of this as well. So we'll give it a second here as we transition screens. And as we're waiting, I'll just use this time to remind you that if you have any questions, hopefully they'll be answered throughout this presentation. And if not, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. Today we'll be seeing how to digitally transact an ATA Carnet on the ATA Carnet system. And we'll be using in particular the ATA Carnet app and ATA Carnet Customs. So let's start. Let's pretend that the issuing association has just given me the Carnet ID and the PIN code to download the Carnet into my wallet. So let's see how I would do that. So I'll tap on the plus sign at the top right and enter the Carnet ID and Carnet PIN codes provided. Okay, so here's the Carnet just downloaded. I can see here some details of the Carnet. Especially I can see how many sets I have available. So how many exports, re-imports, imports, re-exports, and transits. I can see the countries or customs territories that are guaranteed by this Carnet. The issuing association details. I have the general list of goods. I have attached documents if there are any. And a novelty for the digital Carnet is the history section of the Carnet. So we'll see live all the transactions of this Carnet. And this is where the digital operation starts for the digital Carnet, the Travels tab with the prepare travel function. Okay, so once we've got the digital Carnet ready onto the ATA Carnet app, the first thing that you'll want to do is to prepare a travel, which means that you'll be preparing the declarations to show to customs. So to do that, I'll go to the Travels tab and tap on Prepare Travel. Now the first field is a nickname field to remember or to easily find this Prepare Travel later on. So it can be whatever you want. And I'll just type in for me declarations for ease of reference. Then I need to select the departure and destination country or customs territories. By default, it's giving me my country of origin of this Carnet, which in this case, it's Sildavie, one of the dummy countries just to practice and test. And I will say that I'm going to another select dummy country, Bordeaux. Then another optional field, to location city event use, dummy event. And then I need to select the means of transport. This is a mandatory field, so I'll say by land. Then any extra details, an optional field. So for example, flight number, license plate, whatever. So I'll say license plate AA1234, whatever. I can then select if I need any transits, any transit vouchers also filled in. I can do that by tapping the plus button here, and I can start selecting the countries or customs territories through which I'll be traveling through. In this case, I am not going to use any transits, so I'll remove that. And I'll move on to the declared items. So what items am I going to declare? So I'll open up this page, and there's a few ways you can fill in this page. The easiest one is just to select all items if you're using or you're taking all of your items. If not, I can individually add numbers from the general list with the plus and minus icons, or I can also type in the numbers. So for example, 1 to 20 would give me automatically 1 to 18 because I have only 18 items, correct? So what I'm going to do, just to be quick, is select all. So 1 to 80. I go back. Last field, optional, is packaging details. So I'll just type in and then I tap on Save. So once I tap on Save, my prepared travel is ready to be used. I get to the screen, and to actually use them, I need to go to the QR code section. So I tap on the QR, and I can see that my vouchers, my QR codes, my transaction codes, all ready to be presented to customs. The only final step that I need to do as a holder is to confirm my liability. I'll confirm, and the QR code is now ready to be used and shown to customs. If I needed to, I can edit the travel, and once I've done my edits, I tap on Save, and we're ready to go. So I've got my validation, and I've got my exportation ready to be used. Now I go to customs. Okay, so here we are on ATA Carnet Customs. I am logged in as a customs user, and this is the homepage that I'm presented with. And from here, this is where we start the transactions. So what I can do here is I can either type manually in the Carnet ID or Carnet number and the transaction code given to me by the holder or representative, or I can scan the QR code from the phone directly. So this is what I'm going to do now. So open the camera. Okay, so now we're on step 2, and we can see here that this is a validation of this Carnet. So just like on the ATA Carnet app, I have general information of the ATA Carnet. In particular, I see the validity date of the Carnet. I see the general list, the history of a Carnet. In this case, it's empty. It's a brand new Carnet. And then the countries and customs territories that are guaranteed under this Carnet. When I'm ready, I can go to the next step. And this is where I need to check the goods. So I have the full general list in this case because it's a validation. I can put any identification marks if necessary, just like with the paper Carnet. And again, I have the general list, the history, and the countries, customs, territories guaranteed by the Carnet. Essentially like box B of the paper Carnet. So in this case, I can move on. Okay, so this is the final review step of the Carnet. It's step 4. I need to specify if the goods have been examined or not. So I'll click on yes. Then there's an optional field, the customs reference number. So it can be whatever you like. Then some customs remarks that will be visible to other customs throughout the life cycle of the ATA Carnet. Here's a summary of the declared goods. And in this case, since it's a validation, and we'll have all the items from the general list. And when I'm ready, I can commit the transaction. So the final step is the receipt. This is where we have a final review of what we have just transacted. Okay, so now that we've done the validation, let's move on with the exportation. And I can quickly jump back to the homepage by clicking on plus transactions at the bottom. Now at this point, I need to get the Carnet ID and Carnet number and the transaction code for the exportation from the holder or representative. Like before, we can input them manually or we can scan the QR code. So as the holder, I will swipe right to show the exportation QR code, and I will give this to the customs officer. So I will scan the QR code from the holder or representative. And now we're on step 2 for the exportation. Again, just like before, and just like with any other transaction type, I always have the general information of the ATA Carnet at the top. In step 2, we have again the general lists, the history of the Carnet, and in this case, we can see that the validation was committed. And again, box B. Then we get to step 3, where we check the goods being declared. So these are the goods that have been exported. So they might not be all the items from the general list, but just the items that are being taken by the holder representative. I can also put identification marks here if necessary. In this section, I see some details provided by the holder or representative that prepared the declaration. For example, we have the means of transport that we selected before on the ATA Carnet app. We have some extra details and packaging details. At the bottom, we still see the general list, the full general list if needed, the history of the Carnet, and box B. So when I'm ready, I can go to the next step. Next step is where we commit the transaction. So the first build I need to fill in, it's optional, but it's the final date for duty-free re-importation. Now, by default, this is the same date as the validity date of the Carnet, but I can shorten it if necessary. Then I have a customs reference number. This is an optional internal use only number if you need. And then we have the customs remarks field, which will be visible to other customs throughout the life cycle of the ATA Carnet. Then we have one final look at the goods being declared. And again, as usual, the general list, the history, and box B. So when I'm ready, I can click on export. In this case, I see export without exit and export as a two-button function. This is specific for customs administrations that require a two-step exportation. To cover most common cases, I will just show you a normal exportation. So I confirm, and the transaction will be now committed and registered in the digital ATA Carnet system. So here's the receipt. We see what we've just processed and the goods declared. Now, there are some cases, some scenarios where you might discover that there's an error, a mistake in the declaration in the transaction just processed, either you or the holder or representative. So in that case, you'd want to cancel the transaction to redo it with the amended data. So to do that, you need to get a cancellation code from the holder or representative, whoever is present, the customs, and you would have to put it in this section here. So as a holder representative, the cancellation code is found beneath the QR code. In this case, the exportation one, here it is at the bottom. So I need to give this code to the customs officer who needs to manually input it into ATA Carnet Customs so that they can cancel the committed transaction. Then, as a holder representative, I amend my declaration, re-show the QR code to reprocess the transaction from step one. All right, so we saw how to digitally transact the ATA Carnet on the ATA Carnet system. As you saw, it is quite easy and straightforward. The system guides you throughout the process. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and thank you for watching.
All right, I'll give it one more second as we pull the presentation back up. So that video was put together by the International Chamber of Commerce, which is the group that oversees the ATA Carnet system worldwide. And they have various videos on YouTube that you can watch to go deeper into this information. For now, we're going to start by going over some slides that go deeper into each of these steps. So starting with step one, this is what we talked about just recently. This is applying for your ATA Carnet and receiving your ID and PIN from your service provider. So again, the online application process looks just like it does now. You're going to be including the same information, the same description of your goods, the indicating the destination of the travels, appointing authorized representatives, et cetera, et cetera. Once you make your payment in the online system, you will receive your paper carnet via the mail like you do now, and then you will receive your ID and PIN from your service provider, likely via email or within the carnet issuing system. So that's the first step in this process. And now to go over the rest of the steps, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Frankie.
Thank you, Madison. Okay, so here we have an overview of account creation for both the ATA Carnet app and the desktop. Both options basically have the same functionality and features, and the app is better suited for hand carry while the desktop is more useful for businesses handling multiple carnets. So the user can download the ATA Carnet app from either the Apple app or the Google Play Store depending on their device. They would then need to register an account and create a login. And for the desktop, registration would be completed by accessing the URL. And we will review this process in more detail later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at how to download the digital carnet onto the mobile app. First, the user would log into their account, and then on the main interface of the app, select Carnets. Next, they would select the plus sign in the upper right corner and be prompted to enter the Carnet ID and PIN code. These two pieces of identifying information would be provided by the issuing office. And then once downloaded, the Carnet details will appear in the main queue of the Carnet section. Next slide. After downloading the digital Carnet, the user can then prepare their trip information. A travel is considered a customs declaration that generates QR codes equivalent to the vouchers and counterfoils of a paper Carnet. By accessing the Travels tab and selecting Prepare Travel, the user would then be able to enter their trip details. Next slide. The user will then be prompted to enter detailed information about their trip, including country of departure and destination. And next, there is an option to enter the city or the event being attended. They would then need to select the means of transport and enter any extra details. This could include a flight or an airway bill number. The user must also declare the goods by selecting the plus sign next to declared items. This would bring the user to another screen where they can then select all for a full shipment or individual items for a partial shipment. There's also the option to type in the item numbers at the top of the screen. And once the travel is completed and saved, a set of QR codes will be generated for each travel created. So for example, can you go back once? Sorry. For example, a round trip would require that the user create two separate travels. The initial travel would generate a set of QR codes for activation of the green cover, export from the US, and import into the foreign country. And the second return travel would include a set of QR codes for re-export from the foreign country and re-import back to the US. So basically, these QR codes are replacing paper vouchers and counterfoils in the digital environment. And continuing on with travel creation, a transit should be added to the trip itinerary if the Carnet holder passes through a Carnet country en route to their destination. For example, if goods are leaving the US and are destined to the UK and Switzerland, but will be passing through France en route, this would require a transit. And as you can see here on the screen, there is an option to add transit under the Prepare Travel tab. Next slide, please. After preparing travel, as I mentioned earlier, the user will have a set of QR codes for each leg of the trip. These QR codes would be presented to customs officials for processing. And please note here that the QR codes are color-coded to mimic the paper Carnet. During the transition from paper to digital, if any leg of the trip includes a paper country, the paper Carnet would be presented to customs in lieu of the QR codes. And since the US is still a paper country, and the images depicted on the screen, you will notice here, the QR codes for the US transactions will actually indicate a preview of the voucher rather than the barcode to avoid confusion. Next slide. Now let's review managing and sharing transaction codes. To share the entire Carnet, the ID and PIN code would be provided so that the digital Carnet could be downloaded by the third party. The recipient would then be able to create or edit travels and to share QR codes. On the other hand, sharing an individual QR code only gives the user access to that specific transaction. Next slide. Let's discuss the sharing functionality of a QR code in a little more detail. Each QR code will have a sharing icon at the top, which would allow the transaction to be sent to a third party via email, text, WhatsApp, etc. the person who receives the QR code would have view-only permission. And also, as a reminder for split shipments, the Carnet user should create multiple travels to ensure that they have adequate transaction codes. Next slide. Now I would like to highlight the pre-declaration feature available on each QR code. This feature can be accessed by selecting Add Pre-Declaration, which would bring the user to another screen, prompting them to select one of three options. The first option is Pre-Arrival Notice. This is used to alert customs officials that the Carnet holder's intended time of arrival at the port. This helps to ensure that the port is adequately staffed to assist the Carnet holder. The next option is Pre-Arrival Declaration, and this shares details of the transactions ahead of time and would allow customs officials to process the declaration without scanning the QR code or manually entering the transaction codes. And then lastly is Pre-Arrival Declaration with Remote Commitment. This would allow customs officials to process the declaration remotely, and this should only be done once the goods have arrived at the port. So please note, availability of these features would be dependent on whether the port of destination has enabled and approved functionality. Next slide. Presentation of the QR codes works the same as with the paper Carnet. The user would need to find a customs official to validate the transaction by either scanning the QR code or manually entering the transaction code into their respective systems. And during the transition from paper to digital, it is recommended that the transaction codes for all cargo shipments be printed prior to arrival at the port. Now let's review the ATA Carnet desktop. Next slide. The ATA Carnet desktop is a web-based application that functions on the same concept as the ATA Carnet app, allowing users to download carnets, create and share QR codes, and to monitor transaction history. This application is better suited for businesses managing multiple carnets at once. The desktop is also synchronized with the app, which would enable the user to log in with the same credentials and to avoid duplication of work. Next slide. Here we have the main landing page where the user would create a new account. The country selected should be the country where the Carnet was issued, rather than the country where the goods are traveling. So U.S. Carnet holders would always select U.S. The user can create either a personal or a business account. Existing account users can then create additional accounts for colleagues under their company umbrella or for third parties and then manage their roles and permissions. Additional account creation is done under the Account section in the ATA Carnet desktop. For more information on registration, please visit the link provided by the International Chamber of Commerce at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. Now let's briefly look at account creation and roles. Under Accounts, there's a Holder Manager and a Holder role. The Holder Manager role includes all the capabilities of a holder plus additional administrative function. Once the Holder Manager adds an additional account, the new user will have visibility to all Carnet activity under that account. They can also download new Carnets or modify and create travel on existing Carnets. Next slide. Now let's take a look at some of the main features of the ATA Carnet desktop. At the top of the screen, you will see the option to download a new Carnet. Once downloaded, that Carnet will then be visible in the main Carnet queue. By selecting the Details tab, the user would be prompted to accept the terms and conditions of the Carnet and sign before proceeding to prepare their travel. They can also edit any trip details and view and share QR codes. Moving over to the sidebar is where the user can set up new accounts and manage contact information within their company or for any third-party contacts. Next slide, please. Here we have a slightly more detailed overview of downloading a new Carnet to your desktop. Once download is selected, you would be prompted to enter your Carnet ID and PIN code. Once again, this information is provided to you by your issuing office. Once the Carnet is downloaded, the details will be visible at the top of the Carnet section. You would then be able to create your travel by selecting the Details tab. Next slide. Continuing with a few of the main features of the desktop, if you look at the top of the screen, you will see 5 different tabs. The first tab is for details. This information is equivalent to the green cover of the Carnet. The next tab is for items, and this is where you can review the Carnet general list. Next, we have the Documents tab. This would be used for uploading any relevant documentation, such as a POA or licensing information. And functionality of this feature is still currently being worked on by the developers. And then moving along to the Travels tab, this is where the user can view or edit their upcoming trips. And then the last tab is for History. This is where the user can monitor their transactions in real time as QR codes are being processed by customs officials. And moving further down the screen, by clicking on the barcode, this would allow the user to review the QR codes associated with that selected travel. So for example, on trip 1, there would be a set of QR codes for activation of the green cover, exportation, and importation. And then on trip 2, there would be a set of QR codes for re-exportation and re-importation. And lastly, on this slide, I would like to highlight 2 features available on each QR code, just as we discussed with the mobile app. The first feature is for pre-declaration. The add pre-declaration is still currently being assessed by different customs offices to decide if the feature will be enabled. If so, the user would be able to send notice of arrival and Carnet details to the port ahead of time. And then the second feature is the capability for sharing QR codes with a third party. By selecting Share, the user could send one or multiple QR codes via email or text to their contact. Moving on to eATA Carnet history and closure. Now we will review transaction history for both the app and the desktop. Once a transaction is committed by customs officials, there will be a real-time notification sent to the user. Details of these declarations will be found under the History tab for both applications. The information provided would include the type of transaction, the date and time committed by customs, the port of processing, and the declared items. Also, please note that once the QR code has been processed through customs, it will indicate that the transaction code is consumed. Next slide. Now let's discuss returning your Carnet after use. Once you finish using your Carnet, you would need to alert the issuer that you're ready to close your digital Carnet either via email or through their issuing system. The paper Carnet would be mailed back to your issuing office, which is already standard protocol. And then once received, your issuing office would review your Carnet for proper use before proceeding to close it and release your security deposit. So that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I will pass it back to Madison to talk about hybrid use cases.
Thank you so much, Frankie. All right, so now we are going to talk in more depth about the timelines for this global transition and how to handle travel among both paper and digital countries during the transition period that's happening from right now until the end of 2027. And before we get into this, I do want to say that I think these hybrid scenarios can be a bit tricky to navigate, but ultimately this phased rollout is the reality for a global system that includes, tens of thousands of stakeholders really worldwide. But that said, we're committed to providing as much training and support that is needed to make sure all this information is digestible. So if you have any questions on this section, hopefully we'll either answer them in the FAQ afterwards, or we can answer individual questions from the chat. All right, so to get into it, as we mentioned before, the ATA Carnets countries, so all the ATA Carnet countries are going digital over the next year and a half as quickly as each country can. Here in the US, we had hoped to be a digital country before the World Cup, but with some of the government shutdowns and whatnot, these timelines did get pushed back a little bit. So as of today, the US is still a paper country, but US Customs said that we are on track to start accepting digital carnets and become a digital country by the end of this year. So by the end of 2026, the US is tracking to be a digital country. As we also mentioned before, the UK, Norway, Switzerland, and all of the EU countries are already digital. And though they are digital now, if you visit one of these countries today, you are still able to show a paper carnet thanks to a grace period granted by the International Chamber of Commerce and the World Customs Organization for countries like ours who are still completing their technical updates. So again, if you are going to a digital country today, you are still allowed to use your paper carnet. However, starting in October of this year, US carnet holders will need to start bringing a digital carnet with them to the EU, UK, Switzerland, and Norway. So we're going to now, in the following slides, look at which document you'll need to present to which country during this hybrid period. So we're going to break this down into a couple different scenarios using these graphics that we see. So starting with scenario 1. This is the case where the US is a paper country, but the foreign country that you're visiting is digital. So let's imagine you're moving goods from the US to the UK and it's October of 2026. So at this time, the US is still, at that time, I should say, in October, the US will still be a paper country and the UK, let's say the travel's happening to the UK, is a digital country. So when you receive your carnet, when you apply and receive your carnet, you will receive both your paper carnet in the mail and a digital carnet via ID and PIN number. When you leave the US, CBP, US Customs, is only going to activate your paper carnet and validate your paper export. So that's why we have our paper carnet image here. You do not need to show Customs your digital carnet at that point, since at this point, US Customs will only be validating paper documents. In the next step, in the middle section here, when you're arriving and departing from the UK, or whoever's handling your goods are arriving, departing from the UK, British Customs will only be validating the digital carnet. So you will not need to show the paper carnet to British Customs or to the digital country's customs. Then, when you're re-entering the US, CBP would again only validate the paper re-import. So they're only going to be looking at your paper document while they're a paper country. And I want to make a note here that it is okay that the paper carnet won't have stamps from the foreign customs in it. Those will all be done electronically on your digital carnet, and CBP will still process your re-importation as long as you activated the paper carnet when you exited the US initially. When it comes to returning the documents, you will need to return your paper and your digital carnet in order to close out your carnet. Those are going to be considered one single carnet, even though it's a paper form and a digital form. I also want to mention that I actually recently did this scenario 1 travel. Although most businesses aren't yet traveling with the digital carnet, I was able to bring some professional equipment with me on a trip to France. So I, as the graphic here shows, I received both a paper carnet and a digital carnet that listed my professional equipment. When I left the US, I left from JFK here in New York City. I showed CBP the paper carnet. They stamped that accordingly. And then when I got to Paris, when I got to the airport there, I showed my digital carnet, and this was actually just the week that the digital carnet had launched. So I was one of the first carnets that they had seen digitally, which was pretty cool. The process both of arriving to Paris and leaving, it was very quick, like probably about 5 to 10 minutes. I didn't have too many goods on my general list, but was able to get in and out of there pretty quickly. And then when I came back to the US, also through JFK, again, I just had to show my paper carnet document, and I didn't need to have my digital carnet. I didn't have to show them that at all, and they were able to process the paper carnet pretty quickly as well. So that's scenario 1. Again, that was when the US is still paper. But now moving to scenario 2, this is the case where the US has transitioned to a digital country already. So now let's imagine that other hypothetical. So say someone's going to the UK, but now it's January of 2027. So CBP is already processing digital carnets at this time. This is really the scenario that we're working towards globally, where the whole process happens digitally. In this case, you will receive your digital carnet from your service provider. For the time being during this transition period, you'll also have access to a paper carnet. In case your itinerary does change, we want you to still have the option to go to a paper country. But assuming you only go to a digital country, in this journey, only the digital carnet will be the one that's actually utilized and showed to the customs authority. So in the case where you're going from a digital US to digital UK, let's say, the entire process will be validated on your mobile app or desktop carnet, digital carnet. And then when it comes to closing out the carnet, again, if you received a paper and a digital carnet, both of those will be returned to the service provider to close out the carnet. All right, and then this third scenario here, we're going to think about a business that we can kind of use a similar scenario before, but say the business is traveling in January 2027. The US is a digital country, and therefore CBP is accepting digital carnets. But let's say that this time this business is going to both the UK, which is digital, and Turkey. And let's just say for the purpose of this example that Turkey is still a paper country in 2027 in January, which I think they likely will be. So in this case, the business would receive both a paper and a digital carnet again, and these would be shown to the respective customs authorities in the paper and digital countries that you're going to. So first, in this process, the US and the UK customs would validate the digital carnets, because those would be digital countries at this point, and the Turkish customs would validate just the paper carnet for arrival and departure into that country. When returning to the US, the digital carnet would be processed by CBP, since they'd be a digital country at this time, or since we would be. And lastly, closure of the carnet, the holder would be returning their carnet both in the form of paper and in the form of the digital carnet. So again, 3 different scenarios there, and we will have this information posted so that you can kind of follow these diagrams along or come back with any questions. But now for this last section, I'm going to hand it over to Sydney, who's going to talk about some other additional training resources available and go over some commonly asked questions.
Okay, so for this last section, just going to be going over some references and resources. This video we've already seen. This was actually the 12-minute video that we watched earlier. You can go to the next slide. We also have more links to more videos. They have, I think, almost 20 videos uploaded about how to do different functions on the app and desktop. So it's definitely worth a visit. Next slide, please. The user guide. This user guide is also created by ICC, the developers, and they've posted it in the form of a knowledge base that's accessible at this link here. And here you could find all of the up-to-date information about the app, the desktop, and the global digital system. And then these are just some terms that are unique to the digital carnet environment. So holders, issuers, preparers will all have to come here just to understand these. The next slide. This is if a carnet user needs technical support at any time for the app or desktop. And this help section that you see here on the main page of the app and desktop contains links to the ICC support platforms that we saw on the previous slide, and a place that you can directly submit questions to the developers that they will answer for you. The next slide. The next 2 slides here contain some frequently asked questions. I think we'll go through as many as we have time for, and then we'll move over to the the Q&A section that's in this webinar. So the first question is, when and where will the QR code be available? Will it be through the app or printed with the carnet? So QR codes are generated in the Carnet app or desktop after you create a travel. They are not printed in the Carnet, but they can be printed separately as a backup if needed. The next question is, how will digital carnets work for cargo standalone shipments, so non-hand carry? Cargo shipments will follow the same process as paper carnets. In this case, QR codes can either be shared electronically or printed for the carriers or freight forwarders. And then, as we said earlier, future pre-declaration features will also streamline this as well. Next question. What countries and commodities will eATA Carnets not apply to? So we've gotten this question a lot, and the digital carnets follow the same rules as paper carnets when it comes to eligibility and rules. How do split and partial shipments work? Also a big one. To do this, you would have to create separate travels for each partial shipment, identifying the different items included in each. So each shipment would receive its own QR code for those specific items in each shipment. Let's see, how do you close a digital carnet? The same as today, you would notify your service provider that you have completed using the carnet. And then if you also have a paper, you would return it via mail as you would today. And then the service providers would review both of those components side by side. And then when will eATA Carnets go live in the US? We covered this, but we plan to transition to digital carnets before the end of the year, probably around October. And the next slide, thank you. How will digital carnets change the customs process for each transportation mode, whether it's cargo, air freight, or land crossing? So the customs process remains largely the same regardless of mode of transportation. Instead of presenting those paper vouchers and counterfoils, you would just present the appropriate QR code for each transaction. And then additionally, cargo users may also print those QR codes or do pre-declarations where available. So covered that one. Sorry, just in the essence of time, I'm gonna skip that one because we covered it. Will Taiwan carnets also be going digital? Yes, but because TECRO Taiwan carnets come from a different bilateral agreement between the US and Taiwan, that transition will be happening on a separate timeline, but we will do our best to share those updates as well. And this question, if we issue carnets for a client, but we are not the ones who travel with carnet documentation, should we issue the carnet and provide our PIN code to the client to download the carnet on the website? For this, it depends on your internal process. In some cases, it might be better to share the entire carnet if the colleague is managing the entire travel, the entire carnet trips. If not, then sharing the individual QR codes for each transaction may be the better option, just so the recipient only has access to that individual transaction. And what happens if the carnet representative is unable to use their device due to service or battery? In case there are any technical issues, like we said before, we recommend that you actually print out pictures of the QR codes. They will contain the code that you can show customs, even if it's on a piece of paper, or you can just give them the actual numerical transaction codes for them to manually input. And the last question, if we are not sure how many carnets we are going to travel to, can you add that later? Yes, additional sets can be added, the same as today, but it is better to buy additional sets up front if you think you may be traveling to more countries. And I'm not sure we have time for any Q&A questions that were put in the chat, but we will be posting every single question we get on our website in the eATA section.
All right.
Sorry, Declan, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Sydney. I was muted. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I know there's a lot to unpack here. We covered a lot, but Madison will be sending out the materials. You'll have a chance to go through it at your own pace. Quite frankly, it's not, we like I said, we covered a lot, but as you go through it, the process is pretty intuitive. We showed you the custom side, what customs will be seeing, but again, you'll just be obviously working with the app and the desktop version, which again, for us is very intuitive. I mean, Madison talked about using the mobile app going to Paris. I did the same thing. Really found it very intuitive, easy to use, and overall the process, getting the instant notifications about my cross-border crossings was huge compared to the paper carnet today. So again, thank you for attending today. We are having a bunch more webinars. If you feel like you need to join another webinar at a future date, please do so. And again, thanks again for joining today. Bye-bye.